So last year at ASCO, we presented data using the SEER database that looks at the entirety of the United States. And in that data, we found that patients who were Black had a worse overall survival than white patients for CLL. The issues with that specific database is that it's very difficult to ascertain what treatment patients received. So this is the follow-up study to that study using a different database called the Flatiron Health Database. And our goal for this particular abstract was to determine whether or not this racial disparity that we observed still existed despite using our modern therapies for CLL, which we could get from the Flatiron Health Database. So the Flatiron Health Database is a database that collects electronic medical record data from academic centers and private practices. In order to get onto the Flatiron Health Database, you had to have seen an oncologist and been treated by an oncologist, and that's key. So these patients all have been treated, so there's no not treated patients. We looked at all patients with CLL from 2002 to 2022. We looked at race, performance status, whether or not they received a small molecule inhibitor including BTK inhibitors, venetoclax, PI3K inhibitors, and lenalidomide. Of note, the vast majority were treated with BTK inhibitors or venetoclax, so there were very small numbers of PI3K inhibitors and lenalidomide, which is what we wanted. We also looked at various genetic prognostic survival. We also looked at other prognostic variables of survival, including IGHV status, and we also looked at performance status as a surrogate for comorbidity. Yeah, so in our study, we found that Black patients continued to do worse than white patients despite the use of small molecule inhibitors. So being Black was an independent prognostic risk factor for death as compared to white patients. One of the other interesting things that we found was that Black patients were actually more likely to have received small molecule inhibitors at some point during their treatment, which was a surprise to us. So we were looking at that, and hopefully we'll have more data to publish on why that is or what that might mean for the future. Other things that we found was that younger Black patients had a significantly worse survival than their cohorts, and so the disparity actually decreased with age. And so the disparity that we observed were really driven by those younger patients. Other things that we found that were really interesting was that it was a shorter time from diagnosis to treatment for Black patients, and there's been other studies that show that shorter time from diagnosis to treatment is also a prognostic factor for survival. We think that this is because patients have less access to care, or it could be that they have worse disease. And so the question now remains that we know that our Black patients are still doing worse despite receiving our modern therapies. What can we do more? And I think that access question is really the key thing here, because are these patients being seen by primary care doctors? Are they getting the referrals that we would do for other patients as often? These are all lingering questions about how we can do better by our Black patients, because we really do need to do better by them. Yeah, so I think that one of the key things here is that some of these drugs can be really expensive, and in order to get them, you need to have good insurance, right? So the question is whether or not our patients are in a place to get insurance, to be able to see doctors. Like, how does our patients' access to healthcare affect their ability to get treated the way that they should? Other lingering questions that we need to look at is whether or not we are bringing these drugs to the patients, meaning that there's a lot of data out there that shows that our academic centers are simply not in places that, underserved minority patients live. So if they were not in places that they live, then how are we supposed to enroll them onto clinical trials, right? So that clinical trial piece is key. Getting more patients who are minorities onto clinical trials is key. But overall, I think that this is a systemic issue that we really need to tackle head on. I think that there are certain things that we can do that are small that will make an impact, specifically opening trial enrollment in areas that our Black patients and other minorities live, and also addressing that access piece, right? Because at the end of the day, if we have these centers that are able to give top-of-the-line therapy to patients, but our patients simply can't get there, whether it's because they're wage workers and can't afford to come off work, they don't have a car, they can't afford the gas to drive, they can't afford the parking to drive. If we don't make the barriers less, how are they supposed to get to see us? And I think that's really key. The access is key. Yeah, I would say the final thoughts here is that other areas of interest for research is whether or not black patients have more aggressive disease. Is there something different about their CLL than compared to white patients? And doing deep sequencing to determine what their CLL is like and whether or not there's something going on there that drives the disease to be more pathogenic and more aggressive, that's another area that we definitely need to look at. And in order to do that, once again, is the access. We need samples, so we need the patients to be able to see us. And so that's something that really needs to be addressed as well.